Hello everybody, this is ManuS, and welcome to another Legends of Runeterra deck tech. It's been a bit since my last deck tech. I only put out one so far with the new set, the Nightfall aggro, because I have been testing some stuff, trying to figure out what I like, what the list should look like, and so on, and get to master before doing the next deck tech to cover the decks that I had success with on my way to master. So today it's finally time to talk about the next deck. The first one that I want to talk about that I had good success with on my way to master is a new Spider Burn deck that some guy hit master with, and I saw it on Twitter. I don't remember the name. I couldn't find the name of the guy that hit master with it. I think he's probably the one that came up with it. There are more popular people that also then experimented with stuff like that, like Swim, but I think it was a rather unknown player that hit master with it that came up with the idea, and the deck's pretty cool, and I have had good results on my way to master with it. I'm 41-19 currently over 60 games with the deck, so a pretty solid, like 66%-ish win rate roughly. Like 2/3 of the games I won. Anyway, before we dive into the deck and the card choices and so on, as usual, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button down below if you haven't yet to not miss out on future content. Alright, let's dive into the deck. Okay, so this is the deck. The deck is similar to the old sort of Teemo burn deck that we had, the PNZ Noxus deck, before it got nerfed, that kind of plagued people. This has a similar level of burn power, although more of the burn power in a way, or a similar amount of the burn power is stored in units. And you have sort of like some pseudo burn elements from Fearsome, which will yield free attacks early on against a fair share of decks. I think the core of the deck that makes the deck viable now is Stalking Shadows and Doom Beast, and to a lesser extent Unspeakable Horror. Those are like the three big new cards that help the deck. First of all, Stalking Shadows is pretty amazing in a deck that has two burn-like units in Demolitionist and Doom Beast. There's also indirect sort of burn units like Saboteur that at least getting one attack is a guaranteed damage even if the opponent blocks. And the original version had Grenadier. I'll get into that in a moment. That also potentially presents up to 2 sort of direct damage that you can draw with Stalking Shadows, but I currently opted to not run those. The card is super powerful and probably too good, and I probably expect this card to get the Perfect Goods treatment down the line and probably be set to 3. Seeing 4 cards deep, getting card selection, getting like 2 cards for 2 mana burst speed is just really, really powerful, and the card might get tuned down a bit. It is, in my opinion, notably more powerful than Glimpse because it's unconditional. It has the upside of getting you redundant copies of cards like Doom Beast that you want to draw as many as possible, so it does some really powerful and unique things that Glimpse doesn't do. Glimpse is still a very good card, but I think Stalking Shadows is just like next level in a way, which is also why there is no Glimpse in this. And Unspeakable Horror is like, I'll talk about this in a moment. This is also like secretly much more powerful and impactful in the deck in terms of getting damage done than it looks at face value. At the core of the deck is just the good old like Noxus Shadow Isle Spider package. We have Precious Pet, Arachnoid Horror, Elise, House Spider, and Skidra. And once again, Stalking Shadows there can help get your Elise leveled, get you more spiders to use once Elise is leveled, or just go like double Skidra on people and stuff like that. Card is just very flexible. It obviously cannot get Elise, but who cares really? And just like in old burn decks, we are very champion light because we really only care about like early damage, and getting in extra damage, and cards like Draven, for example, just don't do that well enough, or Callista. This is not the deck for it. We just want to be explosive the first 3 or 4 turns and then burn the opponent out, rather than play units that are medium-sized and good at combat, because we don't really care about combat. We just care about having enough units that some of them go unblocked to deal damage. So we have the usual 9 1-drops that you see in decks like this, 9+. The deck has 3 good 1-drops, so it's super easy. Saboteur is great. On turn 1, unblocked, that deals 3 damage. Even if it gets blocked, ideally it trades. and deals the damage, so that's pretty good. This often deals 2 damage because in the early game it's really being blocked by opponents, especially on turn 1. And then we have Stygian Onlooker, which is pretty bad turn 1, but it's still a 1-cost 2/1 turn 1 that deals 2 damage if the opponent doesn't have a 1-drop, which is often enough the case. But it really shines later in the game just to fill out your curve. Like, for example, turn 4, you can go Frenzied Skitterer into Onlooker. The opponent has barely any fearsome blockers, and you just added like 7 plus powers of fearsome to the board, plus whatever fearsome spiders Skitterer buffed. So it synergizes really well with the Spider Skitterer fearsome package. It also is pretty great with Stalking Shadows, because with Stalking Shadows it means for 2 mana you can add 8 fearsome attack to the board, which is also amazing. So yeah, just overall a very nice 1-drop that really fills out your curve later and lets you have really explosive turns. Even as follow-ups after like an avalanche, if you have like a medium-sized threatening board and they avalanche and then you just like Stalking Shadows, double Onlooker, hit them for 8 anyway and they die and stuff like that. It's great. Under 2-drops we have Horror, Elise, House Spider, and Demolitionist. The original version had Grenadier over Horror. I really like Horror because fearsome is pretty good. It scales really well with Skitterer. The 1 damage from the new Grenadier isn't that important. Grenadier is now built more to be a decent unit than sort of a mystic shot to the face with upside. So that makes it a little less attractive, especially given the chances are reasonably high that this can attack unblocked when it deals 3 damage, where your Grenadier would just trade and deal 1 damage. So on average this should probably do at least the same amount of same amount of damage as a Grenadier in most games, and potentially more, and has the upside of being a Spider for Elise and Skitterer. So I think it just kind of ekes out Grenadier, even though it's a bit worse with Stalking Shadows, because obviously Stalking Shadows for Grenadier is 2 guaranteed damage in a way, where Horror at that stage in the game might deal 0. But if not, if the opponent doesn't have fearsome blockers or has less fearsome blockers than you have fearsome units, even an ephemeral Arachnoid Horror presents 3 damage, where an ephemeral Grenadier might be blocked by a unit that can't block fearsome units and only deal 1 damage. So even in those scenarios it kind of matters, and it gives you additional spiders for a leveled Elise, so you can use the ephemeral Horror to challenge and stuff like that. And I really didn't like any other card less to fit the Horror, and I initially considered House Spider, but I think House Spider is way too important for the deck to actually level Elise. There are a fair share of games where you go like Pet into Elise, they block your one Spider when you attack, and then you play House Spider and your Elise levels, and the opponent often can't do that much about it, and it's super powerful. Where if you had a Horror instead, you just don't get to level your Elise, and by the time you get to the 3rd Spider, there's already stuff dying, or you're missing out on damage because you can't attack to not lose a Spider. So House Spider has been pretty critical for the critical mass of leveling Elise, and every time you level Elise, basically you just win the game because it's super powerful, super hard for the opponent to block, you deal shit ton of damage, and you have a lot of reach from all the burns, so there's usually no coming back. Demolitionist is great. It's not really a 2-drop. The deck has 9 2-drops, like 9 actual 2-drops. This is a 2-cost card that you play whenever to fill out your curve. Doesn't even play well on 2 because all your 1-drops die to it, but it's great because it's a 2-cost deal 2 unit-based burn spell that you can get with Stalking Shadows. So Stalking Shadows for a Demolitionist deals 4 damage, which is amazing, making Stalking Shadows often just like a 2-cost burn spell that then costs you additional mana to deal the damage, which is totally fine at that stage in the game. Speaking of Unspeakable Horror, let's set this to all regions and look at what Nightfall cards we can get. So Onlooker is obviously great because 4 attack fearsome unit in a deck with a lot of fearsome units means a lot of damage for little mana. Then Lunari Shadestalker is actually sort of unblockable due to elusive, so another way to have a high chance of connecting for damage. So Unspeakable Horror often deals a lot more than the 1 damage you have. Also Pale Cascade, great addition for the deck still, either deals 2 damage with an unblocked unit and draws you an extra card, so gets you closer to more actual burn. Save something from removal to deal more damage. Lets you win combat, all sort of things. Crescent Guardian, 5 attack, 3 cost, overwhelm unit. Also a good chance at additional damage because the opponent often won't be able to block it fully without taking some amount of damage. Doombeast is obviously the key card, like the ideal card, because we already have it in our deck, so getting more Doombeast that way is great. Even an Ari Priestess is very solid. Can be a bit slow, but there are elusives, big and small, that you can get. Like sometimes you are in a game that isn't looking that great, but you roll a Priestess from Horror, and then you Priestess, and you get like one of the 7+ drop Celestial Finisher units. Drop those, and the opponent just dies to your like big Celestial monster out of your Spider Burn deck. Like I keep saying, Invoke is kind of dumb, but it is what it is. Dusk Rider, another big fearsome unit. So this will usually be the first fearsome unit the opponent blocks, so it's not that great because it costs a lot of mana, and it will just eat, even if the opponent only has one fearsome blocker, it will eat the fearsome blocker. So effectively it only deals the amount of damage of the unit that goes unblocked because the unit is blocking this, which is not the greatest deal for 5 mana, but it's still fine. And if you have Elise out to control blocks with challenge, then it can also like deal huge chunks of damage sometimes. So it's still okay. And the deck has some Nightfall with Horror and Doombeast, and Rider counts for itself, so it's usually at least a 3/5 plus the Horror that gained it, so it's like a 4/5 fearsome at least, which is fine. And then we have Sickness, which is another great way to sort of finish the opponent. Now it even deals the damage more, it's harder to stop, so you put it on like one of your 3 attack units, and suddenly you're attacking for 8 elusive, so even that's very solid. So most of the rolls, as you can see, are pretty great, and indirectly work well towards our like aggressive Burny game plan. And yeah, not a whole lot to say here. Doombeast, just great. Offense, defense, makes it really hard for people to race you, which is huge, because that's some of the best ways people beat these hyper-aggressive burn decks. Even in the past, you just race them, but Doombeast makes that really hard between having like this throwaway ephemeral blocker and draining for 2. And then we have Frenzied Skitterer, back in action, obviously with all the spiders and fearsome, great addition. Initial version for some reason only had 2. I think it was running like 2 Glimpse, which I really don't think you want here. Especially with Stalking Shadows already. And then we have 3 Fervor and 3 Decimate as the obvious burn spell options. And currently I'm running 1 Fading Memories. Other options to run here in this slot basically would be, I guess, 1 Blade Edge, kind of like in the old burn decks, but probably not great. Elixir, Mark of the Isle, Brothers Bond, 1 of Glimpse if you really want to. Probably not Grenadier or Disciple. Caretaker is almost appealing in the deck, but I think the deck is already like pretty clogged around the 3-drop slot, so probably wouldn't want to do that. So yeah, like my favorites probably, I mean, I guess you could almost consider 1 like crowd favorite. It's a bit clunky in a way, but I mean, it's a spider deck, so it's pretty good at making this big, and this has Overwhelm, so it also like deals sort of direct damage in a way. Neverglade Collector is another option to just have some more drain, or like Prankster. Atrocity doesn't seem great, the deck's not very good at enabling Atrocity. You could run 1 Faron as sort of like a backup plan. You can also have a higher chance of getting it with Stalking Shadows. So I think the cards that I would suggest if you want to try something other than Fading Memories, but Fading Memories is like pretty nice actually. Getting additional onlookers is amazing. Getting additional Demolished and Doombeast turns this into another burn spell. Skitterer can sometimes be good. Sometimes you can get great stuff from the opponent, and it helps you like play your Doombeast on curve, for example. So I've been pretty happy with it. But yeah, Faron, Brothers Bond, Glimpse, and I think one of the, and like maybe Elixir, I think the one cost cards, I like the one-off cards that I could see the most if you want to try something else than Shadows. Brothers Bond is obviously pretty good with House Spider and Elise's spiders and just your overall aggression, and also with leveled Elise and stuff. So that's kind of like a classic edition. I think Brothers Bond's probably a bit better than Elixir. So yeah, maybe Brothers Bond or Faron seem the most likely, followed by like Glimpse. There are a couple of options to mess around with and see what you like best. For now, I'm sticking with Fading Memories. It's just very like smooth and cheap, while the other options are like sort of higher impact, but they're also like higher risk because they cost more mana, so they can sit in your hand, be clunky, be awkward top decks. To be fair, Fading Memories can be an awkward top deck too. And the deck usually wins or loses, I think, early enough that Faron seems kind of nice in theory, but in practice, like I said, you probably lose. I have lost too much at that point, or already won anyway, so I'm not a big fan of putting an 8-drop in your aggro deck, but I'll think about it a bit more. Maybe I'll end up with one in the deck for the tournament or something. But yeah, it's a bit awkward, and yeah, Fading Memories can also help with Onlooker in the early turns. Like sometimes you have a turn where you can just go Memories, Onlooker, and hit them. Or even like make a play into Onlooker, Memories onto the Onlooker, and have 2 Onlookers on like turn 3 with another 1-drop and crash. Just a bunch of good options, really. Yeah, deck is pretty powerful, as I mentioned. Had a good win rate. It was one of the decks that I liked and had success with on my climb to Masters, and wanted to share it with you guys. And now we're obviously gonna take it to Battle and Masters and show it in action, show you how to pilot it, give you an idea of how the games play out and so on. So don't go anywhere just yet. I'll see you in a moment with the first game. Stay tuned.